What if the only person you loved started to forget who you are? Leonardo has everything: money, success, a huge mansion, but none of it fills the void of loneliness. His mother, Helena, the only family he has left, is losing her memories to Alzheimer's, and he feels that every day he disappears a little along with her. But everything changes the night he finds a little girl lost in the forest, a mysterious child alone, with nowhere to go. What begins as a simple act of compassion soon becomes an event that will change their lives forever, because, unbeknownst to him, Sophia was carrying something powerful, the key to rekindling a memory that seemed lost forever. And when the past resurfaces through music, a choice has to be made. Stay until the end, because this story could change everything you believe about love, loss, and family. Good evening, sir. Your mother asked for you a few times today. Leonardo stopped at the entrance to the mansion, massaging his temples before facing Clara, the housekeeper. He had had a long day, full of meetings and decisions that never seemed to end. Now, even though he was exhausted, he felt a tightness in his chest when he heard that Helena had called him. "Did she remember me?" he asked hesitantly, taking off his coat and handing it to Clara. Just for a moment. But then she started calling another name. I think it was someone from her past. Leonardo nodded, his heart heavy. Over the last few years, the disease had been erasing his mother little by little. Every time she forgot who he was, it seemed that a piece of himself disappeared too. He walked to the study and poured himself a whiskey. The silence of the house echoed uncomfortably, a constant reminder that despite his success, he was completely alone. During the solitary dinner, Clara remained silent, as she always did. Leonardo realized that neither her presence nor the grandeur of the house could fill the growing emptiness inside him. "I'm going for a walk," he said, pushing his plate away before finishing his meal. "In the forest? At this hour? I need a break." The housekeeper sighed, but didn't argue. He grabbed a thicker coat, put his hands in his pockets, and went outside. The cold night air brought him immediate relief, dissipating some of the weight he was carrying. The rustle of dry leaves under his feet was the only sound that broke the silence. The mansion, illuminated in the distance, looked like a forgotten castle, lost in the middle of the dark immensity of the forest. As he walked, he tried to push away thoughts of his mother. He wondered if that was his destiny, to be a man surrounded by wealth, but with no one to share it with. Suddenly, a sound interrupted his thoughts, a low, almost imperceptible cry. He stopped immediately, his senses sharpened. He turned his head, trying to identify the source of the sound. He headed in the direction of the sound, walking slowly so as not to frighten whoever was there. The darkness between the trees made it difficult for him to see, but after a few steps he was able to make out a small figure huddled close to the trunk of a tree. His heart squeezed as he realized it was a child. "Hey," he called out in a low tone. "Are you all right?" The girl raised her face quickly, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't hurt me," she begged, shrinking back even further. Leonardo raised his hands in surrender. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The girl remained motionless, her eyes shining in the darkness. "How did you end up here?" he insisted. There was a brief silence before her weak reply. "I don't remember. I was walking and I got lost." Leonardo frowned. She looked dirty and frail, and her clothes were worn out. "Where's your house?" "Her parents." She hesitated before mumbling, "My house is a cardboard box." Leonardo's stomach churned. He sat in silence for a moment, assessing the situation. The girl was completely alone, shivering in the middle of the forest. Leaving her there was not an option. "Are you hungry?" he asked, bending down to her level. She nodded slightly, her eyes still wary. Leonardo held out his hand. "If you want, you can spend the night at my place. Tomorrow we'll decide what to do." The girl looked at him for a long moment, hesitating, before taking his hand gently. "All right." Leonardo closed his fingers around her small, cold hand and began to lead her back to the mansion. The silence of the night was broken by the sound of Leonardo and the girl's hurried footsteps on the path covered in dry leaves. She was still holding his hand, but not firmly, as if at any moment she might let go and run. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to soften the tense atmosphere. "Sophia." "Nice to meet you, Sophia. I'm Leonardo." She didn't reply. She just kept walking beside him, casting quick, suspicious glances at him. When they reached the entrance to the mansion, Sophia opened her eyes wide. The stateliness of the illuminated mansion contrasted with the darkness of the forest, and for a moment she seemed to hesitate. "Is that a castle?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Something like that," Leonardo replied with a slight smile. Sophia bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable. "I shouldn't be here," she muttered, taking a step back. Leonardo noticed her fear and crouched down to be on the same level as her. "Listen, you can trust me. I promise you don't have to be afraid." "You're safe here." She hesitated, but finally nodded. Leonardo opened the door and led her inside. As soon as they entered, Clara appeared in the corridor and stopped when she saw the unusual scene. Her gaze immediately went to the girl, and her expression hardened. "Who's that?" "Her name is Sophia," Leonardo replied calmly. "I found her lost in the forest." Clara crossed her arms. "And you brought a stranger into the house? Mr. Leonardo, that could be dangerous." "Clara, she's just a child." "Even so, you don't know anything about her." Sophia lowered her head, seeming to shrink away from the housekeeper. Leonardo sighed and looked steadily at Clara. "She's hungry. Prepare something for her to eat." Clara remained motionless for a moment, clearly dissatisfied, but finally nodded. "As you wish, sir." Sophia still looked hesitant, not knowing if she should move. Leonardo smiled at her. "Come along, I'll show you the kitchen." In the kitchen, Clara placed a plate of hot soup in front of Sophia. The girl looked at the food hesitantly before picking up the spoon and taking the first spoonful. Her eyes widened at the taste. "Is it tasty?" Leonardo asked. She nodded quickly and began to eat more eagerly. As he watched the scene, Leonardo noticed how the presence of this little stranger changed the atmosphere in the house. For the first time in a long time, the mansion seemed less empty. When Sophia had finished, Clara cleared the table and looked at Leonardo. "Where is she going to sleep?" Leonardo realized he hadn't thought of that. "You can prepare one of the guest rooms." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Clara sighed, but didn't argue. As the housekeeper left to prepare the room, Leonardo looked at Sophia. "I know everything seems strange to you right now, but I hope you can get some rest." Sophia looked into his eyes for the first time. "Thank you." Leonardo felt something different when he heard that word, a feeling that somehow that night would mark the beginning of something bigger. Sophia walked slowly down the hallway of the mansion, her eyes exploring every detail around her. The floor gleamed under the soft light of the chandeliers, the furniture looked too expensive to touch, and the walls were adorned with pictures of people she didn't know. She felt out of place. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. "This house is too big," she murmured softly. Leonardo, who was walking beside her, smiled slightly. "I know. At first it seemed too big for me too." Sophia gave him a suspicious look. "But you've lived here for a long time, haven't you?" "Yes, since I was little. But a big house doesn't mean it's full." She didn't answer, but she understood what he meant. Before they could continue their conversation, Clara appeared at the end of the corridor. The housekeeper gave Sophia a serious look before crossing her arms and turning to Leonardo. "The room is ready," she said, without hiding her displeasure. "Thank you, Clara," he replied, ignoring her dry tone. Sophia realized that Clara didn't seem happy about her presence there. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Clara insisted. I know you have a good heart, but bringing a stranger into the house. She's a child, Clara. We're not talking about an unknown adult, Leonardo retorted, crossing his arms as well. Clara sighed, clearly dissatisfied, but kept her posture. I'm just worried about Mrs. Helena, if this girl does anything to confuse her or make her nervous. Sophia lowered her head, feeling like a burden. Leonardo noticed and stepped forward before Clara could continue. I understand your concern, but Sophia won't cause any problems. Clara took a deep breath before nodding. As you wish, sir. She walked away down the corridor, leaving Leonardo and Sophia alone. He looked at the girl and noticed that she seemed uncomfortable. Is everything all right? Sophia hesitated before answering. She doesn't like me, does she? Leonardo sighed. Clara's just a bit strict, but she has a good heart. Sophia didn't look convinced, but she didn't say anything more. Leonardo opened the door to one of the guest rooms and beckoned her in. This will be your room for now. Sophia entered slowly, observing everything. The room was huge. The bed felt softer than anything she had ever slept in before. There was a beautiful closet, a desk, and long curtains that went from the ceiling to the floor. She turned to Leonardo. Are you sure I can sleep here? I'm sure. You need a comfortable place to rest. Sophia approached the bed and ran her hand over the soft blanket. It's very nice, she said, almost as if she were talking to herself. Leonardo smiled. If you need anything, just call me. Sophia nodded, but as he turned to leave, her voice called him back. Leonardo. He stopped and looked at her. Leonardo. Yes? Thank you for letting me stay. Leonardo felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. You're welcome, Sophia. He switched off the light and closed the door behind him. As he walked down the corridor back to his own room, he realized that for the first time in years, the house seemed different, less empty. Sophia woke up early, the first rays of sunlight coming through the heavy curtains in her room. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the soft mattress, the clean smell of the sheets. Everything seemed different. She sat up in bed and looked around. It was still hard to believe that this place wasn't a dream. Curious, she left the room, walking slowly down the silent corridor. Her every step made the floorboards creak softly. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but her desire to explore was greater than any fear. That's when an ajar door caught her eye. She peeked through the gap and saw a woman sitting in an armchair near the window. Her grey hair was neatly combed, and her wrinkled hands rested in her lap. Hi, Sophia whispered, hesitantly. The woman turned her face slowly, her eyes lost on a distant point. Who's there? Her voice was weak, as if she was calling from far away. Sophia stepped forward. My name is Sophia. I'm a friend of Leonardo's. The woman frowned, trying to process the information. Leonardo. Sophia's heart raced. Yes, he's here. He lives with you, doesn't he? The woman blinked slowly, but her expression didn't change. Leonardo? The silence dragged on for a few seconds. Sophia didn't know what to say, but she felt a tightness in her chest when she saw the woman like that, as if she were trapped in a world that no one else could reach. Before she could ask anything else, a firm voice sounded behind her. What are you doing here? Sophia turned quickly and saw Clara standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and a stern look on her face. I just saw the door open and... You mustn't go into Helena's room without permission. Sophia ducked her head, feeling guilty. I'm sorry. Clara sighed, but said no more. She approached Helena and adjusted the blanket over her legs. Come on, breakfast is ready. Sophia took one last look at Helena before following Clara down the corridor. As she walked, something caught her eye on a small table near the bedroom door, an old cover notebook with weathered pages. She hesitated, but her curiosity was stronger. What is this notebook? Clara looked at it and let out a sigh. They're songs that Mrs. Helena wrote. Sophia widened her eyes. She wrote songs? Clara nodded. She was a great composer. Before her illness. The housekeeper stopped, as if she didn't want to continue the conversation. Sophia looked down at her notebook once more, but before she could say anything, Clara was already walking away. The girl followed after her, but the image of Helena and that old notebook remained in her mind. She couldn't explain it, but she felt that somehow it was important, very important. Sophia couldn't get the notebook out of her mind. During breakfast, she hardly paid any attention to her food. The idea that Helena had written songs before her illness intrigued her. When Clara came out of the kitchen, Sophia looked at Leonardo, who was quietly sipping his coffee. "Leonardo," she began, choosing her words carefully. He raised his eyes to her. "Yes. Your mother, was she a composer?" Leonardo was surprised by the question. "Yes, she was. How did you know that?" Sophia hesitated for a moment. "I saw a notebook of songs in her room. Clara told me they were songs she had written." Leonardo put his cup down on the table and sighed. "My mother always loved music. She used to compose and play the piano almost every day. But after her illness progressed, she stopped. Now, I don't think she even remembers it anymore." The tone of sadness in his voice made Sophia's heart squeeze. "What if," she began, biting her lip, "what if she listened to the songs again? Maybe it would help her remember." Leonardo watched her for a moment, thoughtful. "I don't know, Sophia. Her memory is very poor. I've tried to talk about it a few times, but nothing has changed." Sophia frowned, determined. "But have you tried playing the songs for her?" Leonardo didn't answer straight away. "No, I haven't." The girl perked up. "Then we can try." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're persistent, aren't you? My father used to say I was stubborn, but I think that sometimes being stubborn is a good thing." Leonardo looked at her with a half smile. "That's fine. We can give it a try." That afternoon, Sophia persuaded Leonardo to fetch Helena's songbook. They sat down in the living room, and Leonardo carefully opened the book. "This," he pointed to a page. "My mother wrote it for me when I was a child." Sophia smiled. "So let's play this one first." Leonardo picked up his guitar, tuned the strings, and started strumming the melody. Sophia watched attentively. "Do you sing?" he asked. "Yes." Sophia waited for the right moment and began to sing the verses written by Helena. The melody filled the room, light and soft, charged with emotion. A few minutes later, Clara appeared in the hallway. "What are you doing?" "Playing a song that Helena wrote," Leonardo replied without stopping playing. Clara looked thoughtfully at the door to Helena's room. "Maybe she should listen." Sophia and Leonardo looked at each other. "Let's try," he said. Sophia and Leonardo entered Helena's room. She was sitting in the same armchair, looking out of the window. Leonardo took a deep breath before starting to play. Sophia sang softly, but with all the emotion she felt. At first there was no reaction. But then, slowly, Helena blinked and turned her head towards them. "This song," her voice came out weak but clear. Leonardo stopped playing, surprise evident on his face. "Mum, do you remember?" Helena narrowed her eyes, as if trying to see something very far away. Sophia held her breath. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Leonardo hardly blinked as he watched Helena. His mother continued to stare at the two of them, her expression full of confusion, but with a different sparkle in her eyes. "That song," Helena repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Leonardo swallowed. "Yes, Mum. You wrote it. For me." Silence hung in the room for a few moments. Then slowly Helena moved her lips. "My boy." Leonardo's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, Mom. It's me." Helena blinked, as if trying to clear a fog from her mind. Her wrinkled fingers moved over the blanket. And suddenly she whispered a snippet of the melody. Sophia looked at Leonardo in surprise. She's remembering. Leonardo, unable to contain his emotion, resumed strumming the guitar, encouraging his mother to continue. Helena closed her eyes, and for the first time in years began to sing the song she had composed. Her voice was weak, hesitant, but full of feeling. Clara appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide at the scene. When the last note was played, Helena sighed and opened her eyes again. "I'm so glad you're here," she murmured to Leonardo, a soft smile on her lips. Leonardo held his mother's hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. But little by little, the sparkle in Helena's eyes faded, and she returned her gaze to a distant point. Her lucidity disappeared, like a ray of sunshine overcast by clouds. Leonardo closed his eyes, holding back the tears, but however brief that moment had been, it was a priceless gift. Later that evening, as they walked through the garden, Sophia looked at Leonardo expectantly. "Did you see it? It worked." Leonardo smiled at her. "Yes, it worked, and it was thanks to you." Sophia shrugged. "I just sang." "No, Sophia, you brought life to this house." She blushed and kicked a pebble on the floor. They continued walking in silence until Leonardo suddenly stopped. He turned to Sophia, his face serious but kind. "I've been thinking a lot about something." Sophia stared at him, curious. "About what?" Leonardo took a deep breath before speaking. "About you. About your future." Her eyes widened slightly. "What about my future?" He hesitated for a moment, choosing the right words. "You don't have a home, but what if I did?" Sophia frowned. "What do you mean?" Leonardo knelt in front of her and took her small hands between his. "I mean that I want to be your home." Sophia's heart raced. I want to adopt you, Sophia. I want you to stay here with me." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Do you want to be my father?" Leonardo smiled, his eyes shining too. "Yes, but only if you want to be my daughter." Sophia didn't answer. Instead, she threw herself into his arms, hugging him tightly. "I do." Leonardo closed his eyes, holding her as tightly as she held him. At that moment, he knew that he would never be alone again. And finally, their home was no longer just a house. It was a family.